An Odd Boy, Volume 1 by Ngak'chang Rinpoche, Chapter 4, Part 1. September 1963 to March 1965. You can't accidentally drink reindeer urine. Free at last, released from the male penitentiary of junior school, Netherfield Co-Educational Secondary School glimmered with possibilities. A few of the boys in their final year had motorcycles and rode in wearing leather motorcycle jackets. I never got one, but as soon as I saw a leather jacket, I wanted one. Natural to my quirkiness, I wanted it to be brown with brass zips. I found out they didn't exist and gave up the idea. My father, however, took my desire for a motorcycle jacket as a sure sign of degeneracy. I was found guilty in the first degree of not being what he wanted me to be. Those who wear such things are dissolute and usually end up in prison. The motorcycle jacket and Chelsea boots were the first items of counterculture that twinkled at me. And whilst I gave up on the jacket, my grandmother, much to the annoyance of my father, bought me the boots. He approved of the leather soles and solid leather construction, but the other attributes were reprehensible: Cuban heels and chiselled toes. They were dark brown. They reached a full 2 inches over the ankles, a thing almost unheard of in the shops in our area. They came from a prestigious shoe shop in Guildford and must have cost my grandmother a small fortune. I loved them. A bluesman would wear boots like that, sitting under a tree reading strange books brimming with extraordinary characters and their intriguing exploits in the world of art. At 11, the future was looking promising. I had a long-distance line on a Gibson EBO and accompanying amplifier, and there were girls everywhere I looked. I'd never seen so many girls and would often just gaze at them. I have always found ladies splendid. They are magical beings like unicorns, albatrosses, owls, or flying fish. They hit the surface of reality like whales surging up from 100 fathoms. They're suddenly there, sparkling like the very Christmas tree at the end of time, all decked out with every delight you could ever imagine. Ladies in my life have been art. Not in the demeaning sense of objectified images without personality, but as radiant presences who reside in the space of my life. Their part in my life will read as art. Even from as far back as Alice Trevelyan, ladies have enjoyed my interest in clothing. And when I got to Netherfield, my sartorial sense, not entirely to my father's displeasure, suddenly took off in an unusual direction. First, there was the beetle jacket. It wasn't actually a beetle jacket. At least it wasn't made as such. It was simply a traditional German casual jacket. The Beatles took to them when they played Hamburg early in their career. They all wore them, and in Britain they became known as beetle jackets. I never knew whether they were made and marketed in Britain because I never saw one for sale. That was part of the problem. No one else had either. Early on at Netherfield Secondary School, my uniform jacket was stolen. For once, my father didn't blame me. It had been left hanging in the cloakroom during the sport lesson, and when I went to retrieve it, it wasn't there. My father complained to the school, but they could do nothing but investigate. no culprit was found. No compensation was available, so my father made one of those unlikely moves that sometimes surprised me. I was sent to school in my beetle jacket. The school badge was sewn to it, and that was that. The school complained, but he would have none of it. My jacket had been stolen. No compensation had been made, and therefore they had no grounds to complain if I wore the easiest substitute. It was black like the school uniform, and so that was the end of the matter as far as he was concerned. It was black, sure enough, but it had a fabulously broad black satin edging. I thought it was magnificent. For a while the jacket was the envy of all. The girls especially loved it. Girls had turned the school atmosphere into something entirely different. Some differences were delightful, and some were less so, but at least conversation was possible. The girls found it strange that I wanted to talk to them, but after a while they got used to the idea. The genders seemed to want to segregate themselves, and so it was a curious procedure crossing the great divide. The girls didn't understand what I wanted at first, but when they realised it was conversation, it became easier. This was especially the case with a group of older girls who protected me from bullying. I remember a girl called Linda who whacked an older bully so hard with her stiletto heel that it made his leg bleed. There were 3 older girls, Linda, Anne and Susan, who took what must have been a motherly interest in me. I invited them to my birthday party, along with Lindsay Goulding and some of the other girls of my class who were my friends. It was a birthday breakfast in order that my father would not be around, and my mother made splendid hors d'oeuvre. We drank good German coffee and listened to Brahms. Netherfield School was a converted farm or something of the sort. It was a mess of converted cattle sheds and prefabricated classrooms, a sprawl of unsightly, disconnected buildings with extensive playing fields. At Netherfield, sport loomed large. Everyone in the world seemed to be kicking balls or hitting them with bats, hockey sticks, golf clubs, squash rackets and tennis rackets. My response was, why not just shoot the ball and put it out of its misery? My father thought sport important. When you're interviewed for a job, they'll ask, what's your sport? And if you have no answer, you'll not be shortlisted. I said, I like swimming. But he saw that as an evasion, especially when I said, I'd enjoy scuba diving. I've seen the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau on television, and it would be wonderful to do something like that. It's like swimming into a painting. I'd saved up to buy Italian shoe flippers and a diving mask, but the Aldershot Sub-Aqua Club was beyond my parents' resources. I spent 10 shillings for 5 minutes with a tank on my back at the deep end of the Aldershot swimming pool and was enraptured. I could see my father was trying in his own way to be helpful, but no, scuba diving would not do. It was team sport I needed, and that is exactly what I did not want. It's not that I disliked cooperating with others in terms of projects. It was simply that I found competition repellent. The odd boy lay down by the football field, took out a slim volume of Mallarmé, The centre forward called him an imbecile. It's an odd boy who doesn't like sport. Sport, sport, masculine sport, equips a young man for society. Yes, sport turns out a jolly good sort. It's an odd boy who doesn't like sport. Vivian Stanshall and the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band. My father would have concurred with Vivian Stanshall, but missed the irony. I came to realise as I grew older that my father always missed irony, and that his humour was mainly of the slipping on a banana skin schadenfreude variety. He enjoyed Benny Hill and was irritated by The Goon Show. In later life, I gained access to my medical records. They were of no interest apart from one remark made by a Dr. Page in 1957. The remark read, "An odd boy," and so I was. No treatment was suggested and no comments were made as to whether I had recovered from the malady. I was 5 years old when I was described as an odd boy, and at the age of 12 my male classmates started noticing the fact. They noticed that I didn't enjoy competitive sport, and it eventually roused their ire. I'd been injudiciously open about the fact that I found the whole team business distinctly loathsome. The idea that it was accepted form to jump up and down cheering when your side won a goal and to be disconsolate when the other side did the same thing was alien to me. The chimpanzees on the Desmond Morris television programme had higher culture. Later I read his book, The Naked Ape, and it all made sense. I was living in an open zoo. At a certain point, the girls in our class took dancing lessons during the sport period, and I requested a transfer. I was refused. The boys came to know of my request, however, and I was seen as a traitor to my gender. I was reviled. Antipathy to sport was only part of the problem, however. I also wrote poetry. That made me effete. I liked classical music. That made me a snob. Worst of all was the fact that I thought the Dave Clark Five were a passing fad. I thought the idea that they were better musicians than the Beatles was patently ridiculous. Who were the Dave Clark Five? You may well ask. I'm sure they are a thoroughly fine set of fellows, replete with an array of charming virtues. But in 1964, I was not inclined to take a broader view. I talked with Steve one weekend about the whole Dave Clark Five mania, and he said, "Well, my dad said they're from the south of England, and there's some stupid idea that they're our answer to the Beatles." I was mystified. "Our?" I asked. "They're not mine. They've got nothing to do with me. And what was the question?" That made Steve laugh. "Exactly. That's the point. It's stupid. We're supposed to see ourselves as being in the south." I still didn't understand. "But we're north of the Isle of Wight." Steve was doubled up at this point. "That's what I like about you. You don't think like anyone else." I recognised the truth of the statement, but still wanted to understand what Steve's father had said. "You see," said Steve, "my dad says that people can be quite primitive, and when they are, they see themselves in a tribal way. We live in the south, and so we're supposed to support anything from the south against the north. It's like football supporters." The penny dropped. Ah, I see. You must think I'm really stupid. Steve shook his head. No, you just don't think in that way, so it's not easy to follow it. It's a stupid way to see things, and it's really better not to think like that at all. My dad said that it's all built up by the newspapers. The Dave Clark Five come from London, and so they're calling them the Tottenham Sound. That's supposed to be our answer to the Mersey Sound. It's one of the most stupid things I've ever heard, apart from their songs. Steve had my agreement there. Yes, Glad All Over sounds like a football song to me. It's the kind of thing people sing at football matches. My father forced me to go to a football match once, and it was awful. I can see what your father means by primitive. It felt like being in a zoo at feeding time.